the president say and its expectations for the G20 presidency. Let's welcome Dr. Dale McKinley, an independent political analyst, and Comfort Matoti, who is the provincial chairperson of the Black Management Forum of Young Professionals here in Gauteng. Good morning to the both of you, and thank you so much. I know that you would have been watching with great interest. And again, it seems in broad terms and it makes architectural sense, some of the focus areas that we have. We want to look at the economic opportunities for South Africa in a sustainable way. We want to include SADC. We also want to include the interests of Agenda 2063 and the AU, given that they're also on the African continent. But I'd like to maybe as an opener start with each of you for what really stood out, if anything at all, and whether at this stage we're right to expect any detail or whether we should be waiting for some of the detail that we need in how this is going to go forward to manifest over the next couple of months. Comfort, you're with me in studio, so let's start with you.
Good morning, Iman, and good morning to the viewers at home. What was a standout for me in the President's address this morning when he was launching the presidency of the G20 for 2025 was really the engagement groups that the President is looking to consult and also to bring on board. This is quite crucial because with the global dynamic issues that we have, I think we need a lot of voice, we need a lot of opinions, and we need a lot of contributions to come into the G20, to participate, to contribute. And I think the President actually took some of my words from my mouth when he said that he doesn't want us to come and ask questions at most, but rather to come and contribute. And that is what also the Black Management Forum Young Professionals is aiming to do, and also aiming to approach the B20 and also the Y20, so that our contributions and our views and stances in the upcoming well-anticipated presidency we can make those great contributions. I'm
very excited to hear what ideas you want to place in front of the president. As you say, and just to remind our viewers, there are all of these different streams. I talked about the Sherpas, we talked about the T20, the Think Tank 20, we talk about C20, that's civil society. So there are a number of pretty formidable groups that are attached to ensuring that this work becomes visceral and real. Dale, what stood out for you in what you heard? Of course, none of it is entirely new, but what have you been thinking about are areas where we can really have some real impact?
Well, I think we need to temper our expectations. The first thing, I mean, the president hit the right notes. I mean, he said the right things. But there's, in some ways, it's understandable that we have this massive expectation. Oh, South Africa is going to chair for the first time since 2007, and we're going to be able to put these issues on the agenda. We just saw Brazil have the same thing, and very little moved. So while I would say that the issues of climate change, debt relief, opening the networks, putting the third world or the global south onto the agenda in particular, and the voices, all of these are correct. But the problem is the international financial architecture and the trade architecture is very slow to move. And to translate these ideas into reality, as we've seen, these are the same agenda items that we've had for the last 20 years in some ways. So I think that while the president is correct in terms of identifying these particular areas for particular concentration and discussion, it's doubtful whether or not we will be able to get the kinds of things, particularly, let's say, from our own continent and what the AU has put on with regards to debt relief in particular, whether that will come to bear within the 1 year. These things take a lot of time. So I would say the best thing that we could say is that we have a voice. That voice is going to be amplified. We're going to be able to put things onto the agenda. Hopefully that will then translate into some real concrete reality. But the backdrop of this G20 is a world in conflict, a world in war, a world that is about the Trump presidency, which is unpredictable. So I think in that context, my caution would be to South Africans is to sort of say, let's try to at least move that agenda forward, but without massive expectations that these things are going to result in really meaningful change, at least this year.
And not to sound too cynical, to say at the end of it all, at least we'd have a tourism boon. We're really, and again, I know that it sounds cynical, Dale, but I really hear you on what has changed. And I want to see with you, Comfort, whether you carry, I don't want to call it cynicism, but whether you carry the same kind of caution that Dale is sharing with us now, because when we think about a number of things that are almost, institutionalized now, we think about debt, tremendous levels of debt, and we've got all this hyperbolic language, unprecedented platform to push for rights-based reforms. The world is really excited, and Africans are too, and justifiably on one hand, but Dale is really tempering that expectation. So what are your reservations about this, Comfort?
Completely agree with Dr. Dale in terms of the time. 1 year is a short space of time to achieve all of these huge planned anticipations, right? But I think that adequate planning and good synergy in which is going to move all of these moving pieces simultaneously is what is going to assist in tackling these issues. But I think another issue that maybe might have to be considered in this issue, and considering the time frame, the wide spectrum which a lot of people have got to participate, and the issues that we are aiming to resolve, is are we in an era now of maybe de-globalization? Because I remember when I was finishing my degree some years back, I came across a very important article that was discussing the fact that some of our issues which could have been prevented were caused by globalization. But a contrary point, therefore, to that would be, considering we're also part of G20, which is a globalization effect in its own, how then do we then navigate in ensuring that we are solving those complex issues? So completely agree with Dr. Dale. They're very complex. Some of them we can say that they are wish lists because they've been on agendas now and again. But I mean, I think that we are at a point now having the moving pieces moving simultaneously to try and resolve those issues.
Okay, so then let's make it practical, Dale, and let's pick one big thing, right, that we know is documented and has an impact. Illicit financial flows, and the inflows and outflows, so that's quite a complicated thing. But the African economy is drained of around 90 billion annually, and we know that that number could be significantly higher. What we know is that in some countries on the African continent where there's high IFFs, the spending is 25% less on health, 58% less on education compared to countries who don't have the same problem. And it happens, for example, when big companies manipulate the taxation system, so tax evasion and so on. How many of our G20 partners have committed to remedial action against and censure for players in their own countries? And I think that will give us a sense of, how real discussions manifest in real terms.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, Iman, and a very timely one. And the answer to that is very little has been done domestically. So, for example, let's take even the Canadians, which are, considered to be maybe even a little bit more to the center left, or at least more mainstream in terms of their foreign policy. Their extractive industry, their mining industry has been creating havoc in the DRC and in many other countries with regards to the kind of extractivism, the kind of bribery, corruption that is then buying off politicians and making sure that they don't pay taxes and making sure that they can spirit money out of the country. And this is whether it's Russian extractive industries or whether it's the UK or the United States, or for that matter. So here's the problem. The problem is the G20 doesn't want to practice what it preaches. And this is the problem with, the United States. Let's take, for example, the U.S. We talk about free trade and globalization, but only when it suits their own domestic industries. And Trump is going to double down on that with regards to tariffs, which could complicate the situation. So in the sense of what happens is the global financial and trade architecture is imbalanced. And this is the real issue, is the AU's been raising this, African countries have been raising this for a long time. South Africa will raise it, rightfully so. But until that imbalance is shifted a bit, what we're going to have is we're going to have the G20, the core groups of the capitalist countries and the West and in the North, basically calling the shots. And that means open up your economies, make sure that we can compete. But when it comes to actually us implementing our own domestic laws, let's say even on climate change, on environment, on illicit financial flows, well, sorry, we'll not do the same kind of thing that we do at home as we do abroad. And this creates a situation of power imbalances where people in large corporations are able to come in, as you say, and basically run the show. And that's the fundamental kernel of the issue here at the G20. Unless they tackle the imbalances, the trade and financial architecture imbalances, what we'll have is we'll have good resolutions that come out, good ideas, but little implementation.
And so, Comfort, let me bring it to you. So the president said as part of his launch, we will be the biggest growth story in the world. And we know that that's true. Evidentially speaking, by 2030, 42% of the global youth population will emanate from the African continent. And that, yes, that constitutes labor. It constitutes, and it represents, or rather, there's the promise, rather, of many good things in that. But without all of the other things, the education support, the health support, the social support, we may not reach the possibilities that, that we could be. As as young people, as representing that youth voice in Y20, how do you manage that hope with the reality?
So there is this famous picture that is a street that separates Alexandra and Sentin. And I think that street, as small as it is an indication of the limited space for us not to be able to achieve that. And as young people, we need to advocate for the transformation and the widening of that space to expand it so that these issues can be tabled. Because, man, the solutions are there as to what needs to happen and how can young people play a strategic role. For an example, having an adequate allocation of the necessary skills that we need, finding where they are located, and finding strategic ways to align them. That
shouldn't we already be there? Shouldn't we already know where they are, have it so that we can deploy it?
We should be, but we are not, because although we have technology to assist us to fast-track that allocation, but I don't think it is correctly used. And as young people who are therefore saying, for an example, I always say the cities, the Wi-Fi that is deployed in cities needs to be the first step to collect that data. When Comfort logs into that Wi-Fi, it needs to ask you your qualifications, where are you standing, what is your philosophy, what are your qualifications, what are your aspirations, and that data will then be used to reflect the need of where should I then be allocated to assist with that. So young people need to be given that platform, because it is an injustice to suggest young people still need to go out to search for solutions. They're already there. So these platforms, they just need to be transformed and they need to be widened so that we can fully participate on them.
Dale, a final quick word from you on, again, I think you're offering us the opportunity to be just a little more restrained in how we view this, given the past behavior of the G20 and its outcomes. What are things we should be looking out for as signs of life?
Well, I think, look, if we make some progress, if South Africa is able to put the debt servicing on the agenda, I think this is huge. This is a millstone around the neck of our continent, of many of our economies. I mean, in our country, we saw in the last budget speech how much we're spending on servicing that debt, and increasingly it's getting larger. So I think the terms of that debt need to be renegotiated. I think climate issues and environmental issues are fundamentally central. To start getting the northern countries, as I say, to practice what they preach, instead of trying to blame the global south and increasingly sort of putting things on us that are untenable economically. So to make those more equal, to make them more applicable, and also then to get a situation where I think...
Okay, well, I think we got the most out of Dale as well. Dr. Dale McKinley and Comfort Matoti, thank you very much for talking to us. Really do appreciate your time and your insights today. It's only the beginning of the conversation, so don't worry. Yes. We've got a whole year to keep talking and evaluating whether we're closer and we're moving from sentiment to things that are real and that are tangible for us. So I really appreciate our guests today.